Hi, everyone, and welcome to God's Plan, Your Part, a podcast where our goal is to read the entire Bible in a year, seeking to understand God's plan of redemption while discovering daily and practically your part in it.
What happens when you decide to fear the people around you more than the God who has authority over you? Dang. That is really what's at the heart of these passages. Today we're reading 1 Samuel 15 to 17. We get a little bit about Saul and ways that he seems to not hit the mark. And we get a little bit about David, who seems to be doing pretty well at hitting the mark at this point. So as we read over these passages, what stuck out to you?
I think chapter 15 was really interesting to me because, I mean, the title, if you will, of the chapter is that the Lord rejects Saul. So this is not just Samuel getting irritated with Saul's stupid decisions over and over again, but straight up, the Lord doesn't want Saul to represent his people anymore. And he speaks that through Samuel. So I think it's kind of funny, how someone like Saul, who's been chosen by God to be the king of these people, decides that he's going to trick God and be like, oh yeah, I was supposed to get rid of all or destroy all of this nation, but we also kept the really good stuff so that we can sacrifice it to God and he'll be happy about that.
As such a greasy guy.
As if God is to be tricked or made the idiot of the situation. It's just kind of funny. But then when he talks to Samuel too, he's like, oh, but I was kind of afraid of the people, so I wanted to keep this stuff. And it even says in the passage that they basically got rid of the things that did not have value and kept everything what was it? It was the fattened calves, the lambs, all that was good would not utterly destroy. And all that was despised and worthless they devoted to destruction. So that's just it just feels so gross. It's a clear command from God, and he just once again rejected it, similarly to what he did in our episode yesterday, where he's just willing to make sacrifices all on his own without Samuel. I feel like Samuel's probably just this really disappointed dad at this point. Come on, man. You know what you're supposed to do, and you're just clearly disobeying every single time.
At the center of this story is this idea of a nation of people, a group of people being devoted to destruction. We've talked about this a couple times in prior episodes. But God does this to protect the people of Israel from pagan idolatry and also to bring people who have been consistently sinning under judgment by the Israelites coming against them. So when God says, hey, these people are devoted to destruction, that they are. That's it. That's what's supposed to happen. Now you can go back and listen to some of our former episodes just about how that makes sense. Essentially, God is demanding that these people come under judgment for sin. And because of that, it's very important that Saul listens to what God says. We've actually seen before where Achan, when they came against Jericho, I think it was Jericho. When they came against Jericho, Achan kept some of the things that were devoted for destruction in his tent, and God judged his entire family, and the earth swallowed them up. So we've seen already Achan be judged on the spot for not obeying the command to devote somebody to destruction, devote things to destruction. And here Saul, who would have known that story, Saul definitely would have known that story, doesn't listen and tries to trick a prophet. Are you stupid, Saul?
Or even tries to trick God, oh, we brought these for God.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most hilarious lines in the Bible. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed be you to the Lord, for I have performed the commandment of the Lord," which he knows that's not true. And Samuel said, "What then is the bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of oxen that I hear?" Samuel's like, "Really? How come I hear all these sheep? Because they're supposed to all be dead." Yeah. And it's just, man, poor Saul. Not poor Saul.
He's the dummy that's making it.
These are the stories that I think about when I hear about how gracious and forgiving God is.
Well, I was actually thinking the opposite. So when I would think of Old Testament stories without having like completely read them myself, I would always get that idea of like, man, God is like so mean. Like all he's doing is just like destroying these people left and right. But then when you read it in context, it's like, well, gee whiz, no wonder. Like, and not only is Saul making these psycho decisions, no one's stopping him. No one's saying, hey, that's not right.
Yeah, that's true.
Like everybody's just kind of, well, whatever, let's just do it.
Yeah.
Like they would know also.
Saul received the word to do it, and Saul is allowing the people not to do it. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting here is that God, to me, does not seem like a God that's just like, well, okay, like you messed up this time, like maybe you'll get it next time. Like I just always, in my mind, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I'm telling you exactly what's in my head. I always temper like the radical forgiveness that God has for us with the fact that oftentimes God is like, dude, like you screwed up too much. Like Moses, for example, he is not allowed to enter the promised land because he struck the rock. Saul is not allowed to be king. David is not allowed to build the temple. I guess it doesn't show that God isn't gracious. It shows that there's often consequences for our sin.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I was seeing more and more of what I would struggle or would have struggled with in the past is like, oh, wait. Like, that is justified. That's justified anger.
So it is gracious that God did not demand his life immediately like he did to Achan, because that would be fair.
So, oh, sorry. Did you want to add?
But there are consequences. Saul's not going to be king.
Yeah.
And not only is Saul not going to be king, as soon as David is anointed king and the Spirit of the Lord rushes onto him, the Spirit of the Lord leaves Saul, and Saul is now tormented by an evil spirit from the Lord. So Saul is kind of coming under this torment that seems to be at the hands of the Lord. There's a lot of question and debate about that. What it looks like to me is that, again, the Lord is just allowing Saul to be handed over to the deceitfulness that he desires.
I was going to say, before we moved into that part, it kind of like sums up the whole Samuel being frustrated. Saul actually is like acting confused, and Samuel just like gives it to him really straight in verses 22 and 23, where he basically says, like, because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king, which would lead into that like torment that he was talking about, which enter David.
Yeah.
David is actually like suggested or like almost hired out to come and like play an instrument for him because he is so like thrown off and tormented by the fact that God has rejected him as the king.
So then we move into a pretty popular story of David and Goliath. Jay, I'm curious, is there anything you noticed from the story, just being that we're actually reading over it tonight?
Actually, before, in chapter 16, I was thinking, is actually, because I feel like I've heard the story of Goliath so many times.
Yeah.
What actually stood out to me more was the anointing of David. So you go from Saul, who is chosen by God. He like seems to be like the right guy, ends up failing miserably. But then Samuel goes to look for this next king, and David is the least likely, or like the one that they would have least expected, which is pretty refreshing, I think, too. Like, God chooses who he's going to choose. It is interesting because chapter 15 talked about how God kind of regretted choosing Saul. So it was cool to see how this all kind of played out. Kind of like that Cinderella story. Like, where's the third sister? Goodness. Where's the youngest brother? But I really like that. What do you think about David and Goliath? I mean, I feel like it's a story. So as old as time.
David fights Goliath, according to the text. David fights Goliath, having already been anointed as the future king.
Right.
I think what's interesting is that, and I talked about this at the beginning, is that Saul is afraid of people. At the core of who Saul is this wild insecurity of what the people want. He's intimidated
by what they think.
David is like completely fearless of people. His brother yells at him. He's like, dude, be quiet. Goliath yells at him. He's like, whatever. Like, David is so confident of the Lord. I was actually reading it, I was like, man, that would be amazing to be like that confident in God's plan and God's purpose. Because at the end of the day, in this story, like, he does have to fight Goliath.
I mean, he's fighting bears and lions, too.
Sure, he's fighting bears and lions. He marches out onto a real battlefield with a real enemy, with real weapons. And he's tiny compared to Goliath. I know Goliath is called as giant.
He's handsome,
David is
though.
called, ruddy. Called ruddy. So this is pretty incredible. And the confidence with which he speaks is like, no, like, whatever. I don't fight you with swords and spears. I fight you with God. Like, God already handed you over to me. Like, go ahead and die, Goliath. And there's like a spiritual sense to the battle, which I don't think gets a lot of attention when it gets retold. But there is this idea of the gods of the Philistines are shamed by the God of the Israelites who conquers Goliath. Goliath talks about his gods. David talks about his God. Ultimately, it's Goliath that lays dead. I always laugh because what gets edited out of VeggieTales is that David cut off his head and carried his head around.
Yikes. So gross.
But it's wild confidence in the Lord and God's plans for taking care of his people. And so David confidently claims that promise. And we are not David.
Nope.
We are not facing Goliaths. Like, the tough thing at your job is not Goliath.
But I've got my own giants.
Yeah, great. That is allegorizing the story to the extreme. I don't love that. But a concept that we can take from this is, like, we can continue to have faith that God is working in our lives, and we want to honor him and not the people around. I mean, we don't want to dishonor the people around us, but we should not be fearful
putting that
of
above
the people around us who are against what God is for. And at the end of the day, that is where Saul messed up and where David seems to be on point. So
for now.
What do you think is a good your part for today?
Probably goes along with what you were just saying. Just making sure that within a desire to serve God with your life, not allowing what other people think, say, do to sway you above serving him and what he commands. I think that today's world, I guess at any time throughout history, that's like been very easy to do. It clearly, it drove Saul to like complete exhaustion to the point where God was like, nope, you're not fit to serve me the way that I've like set you apart to do. I think that can easily and quickly happen to us as well if our attention and focus is not on him and guiding us in what he has for us.
Hey, there you have it. That's our takeaway from Saul, from David, from Goliath. We'll see you again tomorrow with more of this story. See you then. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to our take today. Before we get into the reading, if we could just ask you one thing. If you've been enjoying the podcast, if you could subscribe to us and then leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you, and every rating we get helps us reach more people. Ultimately, we're just trying to reach people with the truth of God's word, and your review will help us do that. So thanks so much for being invested in the podcast. Here's the reading for today.
1 Samuel chapter 15. And Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." So Saul summoned the people and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 men on foot and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to the city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. Then Saul said to the Kenites, Depart, go down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the people of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. And Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fattened calves and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they devoted to destruction. The word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. And Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all night. And Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning. And it was told Samuel, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, and turned and passed on, and went down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed be to the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. And Samuel said, What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen that I hear? Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have devoted to destruction. Then Samuel said to Saul, Stop, I will tell you what the Lord has said to me this night. And he said to him, Speak. And Samuel said, Though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go, devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you pounce on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on a mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag to the king of Amalek, and I have devoted the Amalekites to destruction. But the people took of the spoil sheep and oxen, the best of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is in the sin of divination, and presumption as is iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore, please pardon my sin, and return with me that I may bow before the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. As Samuel turned to go away, Saul seized the skirt of his robe and tore it. And Samuel said to him, The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day, and has given it to a neighbor of yours, who is better than you. And also the glory of Israel will not lie or have regret, for he is not a man that he should have regret. Then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me, that I may bow before the Lord your God. So Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul bowed before the Lord. Then Samuel said, Bring here to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came to him cheerfully. Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past. And Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house in Gibeah of Saul. And Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death. But Samuel grieved over Saul. And the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. The Lord said to Samuel, How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being a king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint me for him whom I declare to you. Samuel did what the Lord commanded, and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, Do you come peaceably? And he said, Peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." And he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as a man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen these." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Are all your sons here?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep." And Samuel went to Jesse, "Send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes." And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servants said to him, "Behold, now a harmful spirit of God is tormenting you. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre, and when the harmful spirits from God is upon you, he will play it, and you will be well." So Saul said to his servants, "Provide for me a man who can play well, and bring him to me." One of the young men answered, "Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence. And the Lord is with him." Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me David your son, who is with the sheep." And Jesse took a donkey laden with bread and a skin of wine and a young goat, and sent them by David his son to Saul. And David came to Saul and entered his service. And Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, "Let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight." And whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and his harmful spirit departed from him.
Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Socoh and Azekah, and Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered, and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side. And the valley was between them. And there came out of the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephraimite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him was Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of the 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." Now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took the provisions and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host, and was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for the battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines, and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." And David said to the man who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine, and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him in the same way, "So shall it be done to him who kills him." Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" And he turned away from him toward another, and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear, and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by the beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hands of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and tried in vain to go, but he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near David, with his shield-bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog, that you should come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, that the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew out to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in the bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I do not know." And the king said, "Inquire whose son the boy is." And as soon as David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, and the head of the Philistine was in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite."
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.